So, guys, we've got a follow-up update on the breaking story yesterday about FSU and Clemson throwing a hissy fit and demanding that there be unequal revenue sharing within the ACC. Otherwise, they'll leave. Now FSU is just totally going crazy. I'm going to get to that. But the first thing I want to talk about, it says Big Ten expansion, realignment speculation, conference coming back for more Pac-12 teams. And this was always the question once Kevin Warren left the Big Ten. Would they still be interested in possibly making a West Wing? I said yes, it just makes too much sense. The Big Ten, in terms of logistically and travel issues, also money-wise, to add at least Washington and Oregon. And this article actually hints at much more. The latest speculation, the Big Ten isn't finished rating the Pac-12. Matt Hayes of Saturday Tradition reported the news over the weekend, citing an industry source that said if anyone thinks the Big Ten isn't coming back for more, they're not following along about the possibility of the Big Ten would seek to add more teams for the conference after stealing away USC and UCLA. So this is just a source. Nothing is confirmed. We know how these sources are, especially with these type of news. There's a lot of manipulation. There is a lot of propaganda. I must say that before we go into it. Why would the Big Ten attempt to expand more into the Pac-12? Because the Big Ten isn't leaving USC and UCLA alone on the West Coast. It must protect its investment. And what I think he means there is, you need to mitigate the travel issues. Right now, the conference looks kind of ridiculous and completely lopsided with most of the teams being on the eastern side of the United States. You add two more teams, like an own Western wing. Those teams all play each other. This schedule, the overall travel makes a lot more sense. In the long run, you end up making more money if you do add those teams. That seems pretty logical to me. According to Hayes, Washington, Oregon, Stanford, and Cal are the dream addition for the Big Ten if they can find the funding, with Washington and Oregon the preferred teams adding to the conference. So I'm sure Washington and Oregon will jump at the first chance they get if the Big Ten can make this work and they actually offer these spots up, because right now the Pac-12 is an absolute train wreck in terms of their TV deal. They can't go with anyone. No one wants the rights. They're thinking about going streaming only, which would kill teams like Oregon and Washington in terms of their national relevance. So I'm sure this is phenomenal news if this is true for those schools. Quote, the Pac-12 has tried to expand in turn, but it seems to be fighting a losing battle. Now, I saw a rumor yesterday. I talked about it. Yet another one of these completely fantasized mergers between the Pac-12 and the ACC. It's just, to me, it's like a cry for help with these conferences. The ACC knows they have a completely unsustainable deal right now for Clemson and FSU, and they're trying to do anything they can to keep Clemson and FSU locked in while also getting them more money, and maybe you have a merger with the Pac-12. The Pac-12 is looking for anything to cling on to. And then on top of that, you have the weird situation with ESPN investing all this money into the ACC network. Would ESPN be okay with having teams like Clemson, FSU, maybe North Carolina, and Duke leave the ACC, effectively nuking the conference after ESPN invested all that money into the ACC network? And by the way, ESPN has that deal with the ACC that's so amazing that Clemson and FSU want to get out of. So ESPN, they've got major influence. We're going to talk about that whole situation because maybe ESPN is like, listen, we would actually rather just straight up nuke the ACC because it's going to create even bigger matchups and better ratings You get like an in-conference matchup of Clemson versus Alabama every single year on ESPN networks. Maybe in the long run, that could be even more lucrative for them. The schools it can bring in to replace such high profit losses simply are not as prestigious as the ones leaving. And of course, an example of this is USC leaving and the Pac-12 currently talking with San Diego State. Nothing against San Diego State. They're a fine school. They'd be a fine addition. But it's very clear USC is leaps and bounds ahead of San Diego State. And then you're also hearing other schools like a Boise State type school being rumored, UNLV, to the Pac-12, things like that. It is, a little bit dire when you compare to UCLA and USC leaving. You're not going to be able to replace them with, anywhere close in terms of total value. And it's not like you had a great TV situation in terms of your contract anyway with USC and UCLA. And now it gets even worse, and we're seeing the result of it. They're talking about going streaming only, which would be a death sentence. Any further losses to the Big Ten, I think they meant Pac-12 there, might jeopardize. Yeah, so they must have meant Pac-12. Any further losses to the Pac-12 might jeopardize the conference's long-term existence. I think if the Pac-12 loses either Washington or Oregon, or if it happened, it would probably be both to the Big Ten. I think they're done. I can't see a sustainable. Maybe at that point, do you try and raid the Mountain West? What are you at that point? I don't know. And guys, let me just say, I think all of this realignment and expansion and the idea that the Pac-12 won't exist anymore, I think it's terrible. I think it's bad for college football, but I also think it's inevitable. People are going to go where the money is, and the Big Ten, the SEC, that's where the money is, and this is what we're seeing play out. It's very interesting to see human behavior with money involved. And again, I would love to see the Pac-12 go back to the way it was. The fact that California schools are in the Big Ten with a team like Rutgers is just total clown world. But that's where we're at. And I'm just narrating it. It's not. I don't like it, but this is where we're at. There's a basic and simple reality the college sports world needs to accept. The Pac-12 survives as long as the Big Ten allows it to. It's that simple. There's no point in pretending otherwise. The Pac-12 lives at the mercy of the Big Ten. As soon as the Big Ten picks up the phone and extends the invitations, it is over for the Pac-12. So, yeah, that is the latest on that front. It does seem like, at least according to a few different sources, that the Big Ten is still interested, even without Kevin Warren, who was really adamant about coming out and saying, last year, listen, we want a West Wing. Seems like they possibly still could want that, and it makes complete sense. You want to balance the conference, again, logistically, and really even the playing field for a school like USC and UCLA, who will constantly be having to travel significantly out of time zones, 2-3 hours on a weekly basis. If you add the West Wing, it mitigates all of that. College football expansion, Big Ten targeting 4 schools in the realignment process. MSN saying the Big Ten reportedly targeting 2 more. I would assume that would be Washington and Oregon. And then we do have another big tweet here. Biggest realignment news lately. FSU AD draws a line in the sand telling the ACC it has to institute an unequal revenue distribution model, or FSU is leaving. Don't ask how, watch us. So FSU right now, there's a ton of variables at play. They are pissed off. They are locked into a horrible deal until 2036. Clemson and FSU, I'm sure, have been talking together, and they both are coming out with big time statements against the ACC and saying, listen, we need more money or we're gone, because this is ridiculous. Now, the ACC does have the leverage of the fact that both Clemson and FSU are locked in till 2036, so that is a significant hurdle they will have to overcome. And this was an interesting question on the ESPN grant of rights situation. I had a question about all of the Clemson, FSU, ESPN chatter. I know Clemson and FSU agreed to the ACC grant of rights, which then in turn sold their rights to ESPN until 2036. If Clemson and FSU were to bolt from the ACC to the SEC, which ESPN also owns the TV rights to, wouldn't that just be a move from one ESPN TV contract to another contract? ESPN would own the rights either way, assuming ESPN is willing to pay a premium to have the two programs move. Wouldn't the new TV payments for Clemson and FSU just be the ESPN SEC payment minus the negotiated ESPN ACC payment? So there's a lot of crap going on there. I think the gist of it is this is an ACC issue because the ACC, you know, you can't just change conferences if you're locked into a deal through 2036. You're going to have to pay the ACC something unless you can get 8 schools agree to get out of the grant of rights deal. And then the other issue for ESPN, would you really want Clemson and FSU nuking the ACC after investing all of that money in the ACC network? Let's say the ACC gets nuked. 4 schools, let's say Miami, FSU, Clemson, and North Carolina, head to the SEC. Well, you're losing TV content if you are ESPN, you know, because there is no ACC at that point anymore. So I think it's definitely a very tough decision that ESPN is going to have. Probably more profitable long-term for ESPN if the ACC dies and FSU and Clemson, the two biggest brands, are in the SEC that they're already paying for. Some leftovers probably go to the Big 12, which they already have a deal with. Fox also has a deal with them. For ESPN and Fox, the benefit of realignment and super conferences is consolidating brands into fewer leagues to pay for and cutting out some of the low-value programs that they hate paying for. I'm sure they hate paying for, you know, teams like Boston College and things like that, but it's still a great deal for ESPN. That ACC contract is amazing, so you would have to kind of value, you know, how important is it for Clemson to face Alabama every year, and what are the ratings going to do on that, versus keeping that amazing ACC deal through 2036. But it does seem completely unlikely that deal is going to stay without something happening. I mean, if we're in 2023 and FSU and Clemson basically have an organized campaign to put out statements on the same exact day talking about how ridiculous it is, they've got 13 more years of it. Do you really think that's going to continue? It's very clear something is going to have to be negotiated within this ACC deal. And we can only speculate on what that is and how that affects everyone else. Does this end up leading to, based off of what I've talked today, do we get the 2 20-team super conferences? It seems more and more likely every day. That's what I'll say. And the Big Ten 20-team conference would be adding the 4 schools we talked about from the Pac-12, and then the SEC nukes the ACC. And again, all of this is bad for college football, but this is the reality, and this is kind of life with the 12-team playoff, which I love the 12-team playoff, and now you're seeing teams so obsessed with money, they don't care who they face. Everyone is motivated by money. Clemson and FSU have 13 years remaining on a deal, and they are coming out and saying it is not going to happen. And ESPN might say, you know what, we already own the SEC. Clemson in the SEC where they're facing Georgia every other year, yes, please. In the long run, yes, please. We don't care that the ACC deal was good. These matchups are going to get such great ratings. It's more important that we get Alabama to face FSU and things like that. So there's a lot of stuff at play here, guys. We'll have to see what happens. But, some loose rumors right now about the Big Ten still targeting extra teams from the Pac-12. That's going to do it for this video. Make sure you're following me on Twitter. Link to that's always in the description. I'm, of course, the Depressed Ginger. Thank you for watching.